Happy Monday afternoon. You know what that means. It's time to talk about the box office with Mr. Dan Murrell.
Hello.
And his handy charts.
So many charts. Not as many as some weeks.
Not as many as some weeks, though. This is not without interest this week. There were some very interesting things that happened. Let's start with Ocean's 8.
Ocean's 8, the #1 movie of the weekend, which most people expected it to be. However, it slightly overperformed what even the studio is expecting. Just over $41 million. That is the best debut for any movie in the Ocean's franchise. I didn't get my spacing right, too, on that chart. I'm just noticing. Apologies for that. Also, virtually almost tied Ready Player One as Warner Brothers' best debut of the year. Ready Player One, I think, did something like less than $100 million or $100,000 more, but right up there with Ready Player One as far as debut weekends this year for Warner Brothers. Nothing to be unhappy about here. Studio's happy. Audiences seem to be happy.
That charming, lovable Sandra Bullock, she's probably pretty happy.
She's probably very happy,
too.
and I'll tell you why she's probably pretty happy. It was the second best debut of her career. Live action. Now, Minions, which she did voice work in, is the best debut of a project that she's been in, but I just didn't want to put Minions on the chart. So this is live action. Gravity, the only live action movie that she's been in to top Ocean's 8. The Heat, The Blind Side, The Proposal. Now, good news if you're a Sandra Bullock fan or if you're Warner Brothers, those are also, other than Ocean's 8, those are her 4 highest performing live action movies of her career. All of them went on to gross at least $159 million at the box office. So if you're Warner Brothers and if you're a Sandra Bullock fan, you're looking at this opening, you're looking at how similar projects that she's done in the past have performed, and you're very happy today because it seems to indicate that not only do you get a nice opening, but it might have some staying power and make a nice little bit of a chunk of change at the summer box office.
And we really might just see an Ocean's 9. I saw this movie. You saw this movie. I think it was a charming, very tonally akin to the previous films in the franchise. I think it is not perhaps for me the best heist movie of all time. I happen to be a big fan of heist and con movies and things of this nature. However, very entertaining, characters you like, enjoyable to watch. I support your editorial decision to leave Minions off the menu.
Thank you.
And focus on the things that we think are good. Now, less good news for Solo: A Star Wars Story.
Yeah, Solo: A Star Wars Story. #2, so that's the best news that it has, but it dropped down. Let me look at that. It's hanging right in there with 3 and 4, Deadpool 2 and Hereditary, which we'll talk about in a second. It is still #2. However, through 17 days of release, it has grossed $176 million domestically. If you're looking in the Disney Star Wars era, its next jump up as far as comparisons is Rogue One, which had grossed $424 million after 17 days, over twice as much. So it's not only a large margin that Solo is lagging behind the other Disney Star Wars films. It is now an astronomically large margin. Not to be confused with Large Marge, which is the ghost from Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Which, well, she was somewhat...
Both just as scary.
She was both just as scary, but Large Marge was both corporeal and of the other world, both.
And useful.
She was very, very useful.
What's the worst thing she did? Give a guy a ride? Anyway...
Well, we have questions about some of the worst things that she did, but we'll circle back to that in a different video. We're also going to circle back in a separate video. We have 2 interesting videos coming up this week. One we're going to talk about in a second. We talk about Hereditary. Another one is we're going to dive a little deeper about what's going on at Lucasfilm with Richard Rushfield, who has the Ankler, he's sort of a Hollywood insider, talks to the people at the studios. So you'll have that to look forward to. We'll be talking a lot more about the consequences of what's happened with Solo at Lucasfilm. But man, we talked about that last week as well.
Yeah, very bad news. It's trying to edge up on that top 10 worldwide grosser list. It might get there. A lot of it depends on the performance of Incredibles 2, which doesn't open. Again, we'll address this in a minute. Does not open day and date worldwide, but even if it does crack that top 10 worldwide grossers list, it's going to get bumped off real quick by a few movies that we'll talk about later. So no good news for Solo, but the good news continues for Deadpool 2. It drops to #3, but it's holding well. A hold of less than 40% drop off, which is great, especially this far into its run. It continues to track about $30 million behind the original. Looks like it is a surefire thing to break the $300 million mark. There's some days where its weekday business is actually beating the original, which is the advantage of being released in the summer, as opposed to back in February when the original was released. So
how many not 17-year-olds are sneaking into this movie?
Well, that's the other question. They're not They're not buying tickets to Solo, though, if that's they're buying tickets to other things if they're using that to sneak into Deadpool 2. But given the breakout that the first movie was, given how much people loved that movie, for Deadpool 2 to come out in a different season, in what more people would say is a more competitive season, and for it to be lagging just only slightly behind the original, which was such a breakout hit, Fox will take that all day, every day.
Yeah.
And especially the worldwide numbers it's doing, which we'll look at. So Deadpool 2 still holding well, along with Avengers, the two best holds of the summer so far. And then in the number 4 spot, this is a performance that really surprised a lot of people. Again, the expectation for Hereditary was that it would debut maybe in the high single digits. It overperformed, $13.5 million. A24, the studio that made Hereditary, known for smaller movies.
Known for smaller,
Moonlight,
high
Best
quality
Picture winner.
films.
Moonlight, high quality films. It does not foray into the wide opening very often. It has a few times, but even among those few times, Hereditary, the biggest opening weekend of any movie ever released from A24. Again, like I said, it usually focuses on smaller screens, but there's another trend, which is that if you look at those top 3, the Hereditary, The Witch, and It Comes at Night, the 3 biggest opening weekends for A24, they also have something in common, which maybe A24 doesn't like as much. They were critically acclaimed films that audiences did not seem to connect to as well. We talk about cinema score on this show a lot, which is the poll that goes out amongst the people actually coming out of the movie when it opens. The Witch got a C-. Hereditary got a D+. It Comes at Night got a D. So it's the ultimate good news, bad news. A24 can open a movie skewed towards horror fans bigger than a lot of their other movies. However, it seems like the audiences come out of those movies very down on the film, or at least with very polarized, mixed feelings, even though critics seem to like them. Why is that? We'll find out later this week.
You're going to do a deep dive on CinemaScore, what it means, how they gather the data, what the data actually has to say about an audience reaction to it, whether it really is, did they like the film, or did they feel like they were sold a bag of goods that was the wrong bag of goods? Was the film mismarketed? In this case, I got to say, I feel like Hereditary was correctly marketed. Most of those films I feel like were truly mismarketed and were a little bit deceptive in their marketing.
I think The Witch and It Comes at Night were very misleadingly marketed. I thought Hereditary was marketed perfectly, but people still went to that theater seemingly expecting something different. Exactly.
And I have a theory on that, which is this, is that genre in general, we have seen this, we've done videos on this, that there is a sense of ownership when someone is a fan of a particular genre or property, franchise, what have you. In this particular case with horror, I do wonder if horror fans have fallen, Lon Harris and I talked about this a little bit, have fallen into that same kind of ideological sense of, I own what horror is, and it's this and this and this, and it's not that. And so if you show me that, I'm not going to like it. I'm very curious. I'm glad to see that Hereditary made the money that it did this weekend. You and I are both fans. We have a big spoiler review if you guys are interested, if you do go see it. I'm curious how big an impact the CinemaScore will have, how big an impact that what it translates to in terms of word of mouth, and what we see in theaters next week for this film.
Well, that's what we're going to get into. And I will say there are some movies that are in that same score range as the movies we just talked about, The Witch, Hereditary, It Comes at Night, which some people say, like, well, audiences obviously didn't like them. There's some movies that I will highlight in that video that are really going to surprise you, that CinemaScore audiences came out saying the same thing about, that went on to become, in many cases, favorites of modern audiences. So we'll get into that later this week. A lot of cool stuff to look into. I'm excited to kind of formulate all that stuff together and compose that video.
Yeah, well, let's say I'm looking forward to seeing that one as well. That'll be out this weekend. This winter, yes. This winter. It's going to take a long time to put this together, because I was going to say this week, but it's actually this weekend, along with our Disney video. It's a bad news, good news, probably good news again this weekend situation for Disney. Avengers Infinity War, cusping, and maybe since we've even been filming this, surpassed and hit that $2 billion mark.
As we're sitting here right now today, it has probably taken in its $2 billionth worldwide. As of yesterday, when all of the actual box office results were released, Infinity War has not quite crested. It's about $1 million away from breaking that $2 billion mark. However, having said that, the money that it's taken in today, it has probably crossed that $2 billion mark, which we talked about a few weeks ago. As you remember, I said if I had to guess, I would have said no, but I thought it was going to be close. Well, it looks like particularly the failure of Solo has nudged it across the finish line, and it also got a big boost this week from China. We talked about how well the movie was doing in China. China generally has a limited window of release that it gives foreign films, of which Infinity War is one. Last week, China granted Infinity War a 30-day release extension, which allows it to stay in theaters for another month, which will do nothing but push that foreign gross, worldwide gross even higher. So Infinity War will officially become the 4th movie of all time to break $2 billion. So now all eyes turn towards that Star Wars The Force Awakens gross, which is now ever so close. Will it cross that barrier?
Will Disney beat its own record? I mean, look, we're talking about Solo and the consequences of Solo, which, again, we'll get into a little bit more, but you cannot argue with how dominant they are in this industry and have been for the last number of years. Incredibles 2 is opening here domestically this weekend. But let's talk about all-time grosses.
It passed another. Again, it's 5th place at the box office this weekend, but it's also 5th place on another much more prestigious list. It passed Jurassic World. It kicked it out of the top 5 right before that new sequel opened to become the 5th highest grossing movie domestically of all time. It's going to be sinking the Titanic in the next 2 or 3 days, looking up at Black Panther. Now, will it pass Black Panther? If you're looking at the daily grosses as far as what the movies were making to this point in their release, conventional wisdom would say no, because Black Panther at this point in its release was grossing more day-to-day than Infinity War is grossing. So I think they're going to have very similar grosses. I don't think Infinity War is going to pass it. But even still, if you look at that list, if it stays the way it is or the way it's going to be with Avatar and Force Awakens, with Infinity War and Black Panther and Titanic, Disney will now own 3 of the top 5 domestic grossers of all time, all released in the last 3 years. So yeah, they're doing okay. They're doing okay. Solo is a bit of a disappointment, but they're doing okay.
We're not that worried about Team Disney. You know what's good news for cinema goers everywhere? The top per screen.
The top per screen, and I love to see this. For the 3rd time in 4 weeks in the summer, 2001: A Space Odyssey earned the top per screen in the country. It's on 5 screens, almost $20,000 per screen, the 70-millimeter re-release. It just edged out Hearts Beat Loud, which is a new movie starring Nick Offerman and Kiersey Clemons. And there's a documentary out that I loved and got me very emotional called Won't You Be My Neighbor, which it also edged out. Now, Won't You Be My Neighbor opened on 29 screens. If it had opened on probably even 5 fewer screens, more than likely it would have taken that top per screen average, because this is out of all those movies, it made the most total. It made almost $500,000 this weekend. It was just open on more screens. But that is a movie that is going to start expanding here in the next coming weeks, and it wouldn't surprise me if we're talking about it as far as overall grosses, because it is a very beautiful, touching, heartfelt documentary, and hopefully one that you would think anybody could watch and connect to.
Oh, absolutely.
But you never know nowadays.
Well, here's a little peek behind the curtain. My boyfriend and I went to see this movie this weekend, came out to validate our parking and who's standing there, but Mr. Dan Murrell and his partner. So yeah, there we had it. We were in the same screening.
We didn't know we were double dating. We had no idea, Ross.
By accidental double dating. I loved this movie.
Yep.
I saw it back to back with RBG. And it felt, so 2 documentaries in a row, each of which looked at a person's career, the impact of their career, their lives' work, and each working towards having a positive impact in the world, in this case, Mr. Rogers. This movie is emotionally effective. I think I had watched Mr. Rogers when I was a kid, but I didn't have the deep sort of tie and connection that a lot of people do. And yet I cried several times in the movie. I felt uplifted. I felt heartwarmed. I felt optimistic about the future. And I felt inspired in terms of the message that he delivered and how you can contribute to your own life and to society. So even if you don't know who Mr. Rogers is, even if that wasn't a part of your childhood, if you didn't grow up here in the States, I think this is a documentary that will work even if you don't have that connection.
Yeah, there's a dimension to it that even my girlfriend and I were talking on the way home, like, because we both watched Mr. Rogers, and they talk about all the stuff that he covered. And we both were saying, like, I don't remember him doing that, but that's because he wasn't doing it in such an obvious way that you felt like he was, you know, he was just Mr. Rogers. Anyway, highly recommended to anybody that wants to check it out. Just a very beautiful portrait about love and goodwill and harmony and just things
how to love yourself and others.
How to love yourself
simple
and others.
Messages.
Yeah, it's very simple.
Simple messages from actually, I really think a brilliant man who everything that he did on that program that we thought was just sort of accidental almost. Mm-hmm. You know, it was slow paced. All of that was with intention.
Yeah.
All of that was to deliver a particular message specifically to people in their upbringing, and it works for us as adults too. So go see the movie.
Yep.
Anyhow, it's not on the worldwide box office.
No,
yet.
Not going to quite make that list, but nothing really new on the list this week. The most important thing that happened on the worldwide list was something that's not there yet, which is Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. It doesn't open here in the U.S. until next week. However, it opened in several overseas markets this weekend to get ahead of the World Cup. Looking at the gross market by market, there were some markets where it opened slightly higher than Jurassic World. There were some markets where it opened slightly lower than Jurassic World. So far, very limited case study. So far, the global interest in the movie seems to be about on par, more or less, with the last film. We'll know more this week because it opens in China, where Jurassic World, the last movie, opened to over $100 million 3 years ago. So a big part of the global picture on Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom is going to fall in place before it even opens here in the U.S. When we see what happens in China, does it open similarly to Jurassic World? Does it grow on that opening? And then in a weird way, and this is one of the things that we're not quite used to, the U.S. box office will kind of play in on the tail end of the global picture as opposed to leading it like we see so often.
And the releases of the next, so for Jurassic World and Incredibles, the release structure is a little unusual because of the World Cup.
Yeah, Incredibles is kind of the opposite. We're getting Incredibles here in North America this week. But in a lot of places in Europe, particularly in Europe, it's not coming out until late June, July. In some cases, if you're looking at Spain, Italy, and Germany, it's not coming out until September and August to avoid conflict with the World Cup. So Incredibles 2 is one that will have the North American picture this week. I believe it opens in China next week. But as far as how it's going to do in a lot of these other countries overseas, we're going to have to wait a month, 2 months, even 3 in some cases, to see how it does and get the full global picture. It reminds me a little bit of Coco when it came out last year, which was, you know, we knew how well it did here, but then it opened a little bit later in China. It opened a little bit later in a bunch of other markets, and then we could finally kind of piece together the global picture on it, which is actually really good for Pixar. So Incredibles 2 is going to kind of be a slow burn as far as how it does globally, but we're going to know how it does here this weekend.
Yeah, and it's been a pretty interesting picture too in terms of over this year we've seen a couple of times disappointing films boost other films.
Yeah.
Certainly we've seen that with Avengers and Solo, as you mentioned earlier. I am curious, Incredibles 2, we've seen it. We have a review up. I think this movie is going to make a tidy sum of money.
It is.
It's going to do very, very well for itself when all is said and done. Do you prognosticate that prognosticators will prognosticate doomsday scenarios for it, not taking into account that it hasn't opened in X, Y, and Z market yet?
Yes, that happened with Coco.
Yeah.
That happened with Coco. I mean, I'm serious. I read about, there were some reports on Coco that were saying like, oh, it's a good dinosaur. It's not, the Pixar, it's a disaster. Look at these grosses, these overseas grosses. They're so far low. And it hadn't opened in several key markets yet. And I think that's the key when you're doing these box office things is like, yes, the North American box office is a part, but you really do need to pay attention to where it's open and where it hasn't opened, because that can fill in the gaps so much on a movie. Particularly Coco was massively successful in China. Which was not in the numbers when it first opened. So there, for the people that were saying like, oh, the numbers on Coco were so low. No, Coco was actually a big hit internationally. It just hadn't opened in some places. And I think a lot of times people will jump to the assumption that a movie has opened day and date everywhere when it hasn't. That's why, sometimes the box office is a sprint. Sometimes with a movie like Solo, we're sitting here in its third week. It's open pretty much everywhere it's going to open. We can sit and make conclusions and say, yeah, this is what this is what the picture on the movie looks like, and we can start drawing those conclusions. But there are some movies that have different release schedules, particularly this summer. You can't sit after week 2 or week 3 and make a definitive conclusion. You've got to wait for it to hit all these markets.
Wait, give it a minute. Give it a minute.
Give it a minute. Just give it a minute.
Especially this World Cup is going to take over everything.
It is, but I think first Incredibles 2 is going to take over everything. Looking at the domestic chart and whether, is Incredibles 2 going to jump onto this 2018 chart? It's possible. 2 years ago on this exact same weekend, Finding Dory opened to $135 million, which is a mind-blowing opening, way higher than even a lot of other people expected. Cars 3, to be fair, opened a lot lower last year. But if I were going to place a bet, if I were going to guess, I would say that Incredibles 2 is going to be a little bit closer to Finding Dory than it is to Cars 3. I think it's going to open at a minimum near $100 million.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not. This is just a get. Having seen the movie and just looking at what Pixar has done in the past,
sequel.
It's a long-awaited sequel. Again, Finding Dory, $135 million. I wouldn't be shocked if Incredibles 2 found that kind of number. Honestly.
Reviews lifted this morning. Did you check Rotten
Yeah,
Tomatoes?
Last time I checked, they're at 95%.
Yeah.
So early reviews are really strong. I thought with Finding Dory, I was like, oh, it's been so long since Finding Nemo. Are people even going to remember that movie? And it was a massive opening. So Incredibles is about as old as Finding Nemo was 2 years ago. I think it's going to be, I think it's going to have a huge opening, and I think it's going to have long legs, and I think it's going to make a lot of money.
Legs, apple juice.
There you go. Drink that apple juice.
A shot of apple juice, get you through the day. I think it's the type of thing, too, that you introduce a new generation to, that it actually, people are saying, oh, this isn't for kids. This is for people that were kids. I think it's for both.
Yeah.
And a lot of people probably have kids,
yeah.
Now, and that were a little older when it came out.
I mean,
that
if you're
weren't necessarily little kids.
15 years old when Incredibles came out, then you're well within the range of having kids to bring of your own to bring to these movies, and it just looks.
I think that
fun.
might work in its favor.
I think it might. One chart it's definitely going to be on is the summer movie chart. Let's look at that. Ocean's 8 jumps in at number 8. How fitting. Jumps in at number 8. Show Dogs is on the way out. Tully is dropped out. This is where you start. The separation starts right around here. Incredibles 2 is going to be up here. Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom is going to be up here. I think Ocean's 8 is going to stick around, if not for the duration, at least for quite a while. So this is where you start to kind of your life of the parties and overboards and breaking in start dropping off as your bigger releases start coming in. So another movie that might be on that chart, who knows, is one that we are tracking all summer long with our own customized countdown. Roth's favorite chart
of
the show. We are a mere 2 months, 60 days away from the Meg.
Get me that shark movie. Get it in my belly. It's funny because I have a couple of people saying now, what are you going to do if the Meg comes out and it's just really mediocre?
It's probably going to be mediocre and terrible.
I'm presuming it is.
Yeah, exactly.
What I'm enjoying now is the 2-month window that I have to pretend that it is either going to be an awesome disaster, which would be okay, or really actually a great shark movie, because I love a great shark movie. I like a genetically engineered water beast, and I like a prehistoric beast discovered. Yeah. So from now until the minute I see the Meg, it's the best thing that's ever been or will be.
Yep.
In my mind.
This week, though, before we get to the Meg, we have a lot of movies to get to. This week, Incredibles 2, as we mentioned, hits theaters here in North America. Tag opens in wide release,
which
is getting some good buzz. Yeah,
our own Danielle Radford covered the junket.
Yeah,
we'll have that on SJU this week. And
then here's an interesting thing: getting a wide release here in the North America as well is Race 3, which is a Hindi language film, one of the few foreign films that's getting a wide North American release from India. That opens. I didn't have a theater count, but it's set for a wide opening. So could it be this year's Wolf Warrior 2?
Could it?
Here in the summer? We don't know. But Race 3 also getting a wide release here in North America. So we got Incredibles this week. We got Dinosaurs next week. We got all kinds of stuff going on.
It's going to be a big summer. It's already underway. We'll see how it all shakes out in the end. You guys let us know what you think in the comments below. What are the films that are still to come out that you're most looking forward to? What are the ones that you've seen so far that you love the best or the worst? Express yourselves in the comments below. Be nice to each other, and let's all create a great community together like Mr. Rogers would have wanted for us. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next Monday.